Okay, looks like we're live. Hi, welcome everyone to day 2 of Open Days live Q&A chat. Today for you again, we have some tutors and some students, and as last time, I'm going to just get everyone to introduce themselves. So my name is Nele de Meire. I'm the admissions coordinator for psychology. Beth, do you want to say hi?
Hi, I'm Bethany. I'm a second year studying EP at St Anne's College.
And then there's Emily.
Hi, I'm Emily Lindsay-Smith and I'm one of the outreach officers at the Faculty of Linguistics.
Dave again.
So I'm Dave. I teach philosophy in the university and I do a similar role in philosophy to Neil's in psychology. I coordinate admissions and do some of the school's outreach work within the context of the philosophy faculty, which has a joint degree with psychology, and that's why I'm here.
And then we have Paula today.
Hiya, I'm Paula. I'm a second year and I study psychology and linguistics at Worcester College.
And Gaia, you here?
Hello everyone, I'm Gaia. I'm a psychologist. I teach developmental psychology in the department. I'm here in my role of Associate Head for Education. Is that right, Nelly? Okay. Mainly to answer questions about a new degree program, the 4-year optional program.
Okay, thanks everyone. So there's been a few questions that have come in, but please feel free to add questions onto our Slido, so on the typed Q&A, and we'll try and address those. If there's stuff you want us to talk about, we're very happy to do so. I thought I'd start by asking the students one of the questions that came in late yesterday, which is, would you say you're enjoying the course as it is? Is there anything you know now that you wish you had known earlier, or that you wish you'd known when you applied? So Paula, do you want to start?
That's a tough question. I'm definitely enjoying the course. I think, I mean, I do think the new kind of the 4-year structure sounds quite interesting. The opportunity to do the more sort of independent research in the 4th year. Obviously that wasn't an option when I applied, but I think that certainly wouldn't have put me off if it had been an option when I was applying.
Great. So Bethany, are you enjoying the course, and is there anything you know now that you wish you'd known when you were applying?
Yeah, I'm really enjoying the course at the moment. I think EP covers such a broad variety of subjects that you can always find something that you're interested in. There's always something that's going to really capture what you really love to do. And the new 4-year course sounds amazing. I would have applied definitely been a lot more comfortable in my decision if the 4-year course is offered, because I think the practical element and getting that kind of experience is something so unique that Oxford can offer. And you're also studying with people who are top in their field and have spent their whole lives doing this. So it's a really great opportunity to get a more deeper inside look into psychology.
So which part are you enjoying the most, Beth?
Reading, sadly. I love reading papers. Yeah.
And anything you know now that you wish you'd known when you applied?
How to read scientific papers is a great tool when you're studying EP, because that's what you'll mainly be doing, especially as you move further into your degree. And there's loads of great resources online that tell you how to read it efficiently for a student. Otherwise, you might be spending more time than you would like studying. But it's definitely a skill that you develop. But knowing that whenever I went to it would have been a lot smoother going in.
Brilliant. We still have Jamie here as well. Sorry, I didn't introduce you, Jamie. Do you want to do a brief introduction? We asked Jamie to stay because he's our one philosophy student who's taking some philosophy. So from that perspective, maybe what did you enjoy the most? And is there anything you know now that you wish you'd known?
Yeah, hi, my name's Jamie. I've just graduated from reading philosophy and linguistics at Jesus College. From the philosophy side of things, I think I really loved all of it. I particularly enjoyed one of the core finals modules called Knowledge and Reality, which is essentially contemporary metaphysics and epistemology. So thinking about what is knowledge, how can we have knowledge? And then in metaphysics stuff, you get to do wacky things like time travel and what objects even are and possible worlds. And so there's, like, for example, there's a fun theory from David Lewis who claims that there's a multiverse. So there's some really fun things in that. I particularly enjoyed that course.
That's great, thank you. Oh yeah, anything you know now that you wish you'd known when you applied?
I mean, this isn't philosophy specific, but it is true of everyone who applies for this course, is that the statistics course is really fun. I applied thinking, okay, well, I'll just kind of have to weather the stats course and that'll be a bit boring, but actually probably one of my favorite parts of the degree. So I really enjoyed that. I guess the only other thing I would say is that you don't have to read every word of the reading list. You can kind of skim, which I have learned only at my graduation stage, which is arguably a bit late, but that's my...
I think it's a good point actually about the stats, because there was a question in the Q&A from someone who wanted to philosophy and linguistics and said, oh, do I have to take the stats? And the answer is yes, you have to take, well, we highly recommend you take the stats. There is Dave can perhaps answer with specifics, but it's mainly because both psychology and linguistics require that kind of grounding. But any intricacies, Dave's on it more than I am. Dave, do you want to add?
Well, no, just to say that I think doing stats and probability is very important. If you've got enough maths background that you could potentially, there are ways perhaps of negotiating for prelims papers so that you could do stats and probability alongside it. If you've got A-level further maths, you won't find stats and probability theory very hard, but it's really important for, certainly it's really important for linguistics and for psychology. But the kind of disciplined analytical thinking that it encourages are good for philosophy as well. So the synergies are actually there right the way across the board. I would say, just in response to something that Jamie said, when he said he was doing time travel as part of Knowledge and Reality, we don't really want to overfreight expectations here. He was reading about, and so, well, he may, I mean, I don't know, maybe things at his college go more excitingly than they do at mine. When we talk about time travel, we don't tend, except in the obvious way of moving through time, to do it.
Brilliant, thank you. Moving on to one of the next questions, I think, which is both for students and tutors. What would you say is the most interesting part about studying or teaching experimental psychology? So I'll move this to Gaia. What do you like most about teaching psychology?
Oh, I love the projects. So getting together with other amazingly interested and clever and interesting people who've just learned about some of the material and coming up with great ideas, hypotheses, and then developing that further into a project. I think that's the most fun part. Of course, I also like to talk about my research and what I like to do, and hear more about what other people think about it. But I think the project is where you get really into the experimental data and the methods, the practical things that need to work out, even the, climbing under tables and getting connections between pieces of equipment, even that, working that out is quite fun too. So I think the project is definitely what I enjoy most, but tutorials are really fun as well. So in any subject, I think, actually, both from the introductory first year ones and the more advanced ones, they're different, but really interesting, fun discussions. Well, at least for me, I'm not sure if my tutees agree, but anyway, yeah.
Great, thanks. Paula, you're a psychology linguistics student, so what do you think is the most interesting part for you about studying both the psychology and the linguistics? Have you got particular preference or things that you liked?
I think what I wasn't expecting is that actually the things that I find really interesting have evolved quite a lot since I applied. So when I applied, I was quite interested in the kind of psycholinguistic aspect, hence one of the reasons I chose psychology and linguistics, because I wanted to study that kind of overlap. But even within psychology, I think I started off very interested in biopsychology, and that's kind of faded out, and there's more kind of cognition stuff that I'm interested in now. And the same with linguistics. I've gotten quite into historical linguistics over the course of my study, and I think that's, it's nice to have that kind of breadth of study, because and with all of the different courses that you do in the grounding of the psychology kind of part ones, you read about a lot of stuff and you think, oh, actually that really interests me, stuff that you would never have considered studying beforehand.
Brilliant. So what we've not heard about yet is philosophy. Dave, what do you like about teaching philosophy?
Well, philosophy is the kind of subject that lends itself so naturally to teaching in the way that it's taught in Oxford, the tutorial system, conversation about ideas, the chance to prepare for the tutorial by reading and writing and thinking, and then really engaging around a subject. So it's a subject that if you enjoy, you will enjoy the way that stuff is done in the Oxford context. That's certainly right. And then there are particular parts of teaching philosophy that I enjoy. So I enjoy teaching. I've just in the last few years started teaching aesthetics. I'm really enjoying that, the philosophy of art criticism, and philosophy of religion and ethics, I suppose, would be the two areas that are principally part of what I was appointed in Oxford to do. But I teach lots of other areas, and that I'd say is another great thing about both philosophy and teaching philosophy at Oxford. Philosophy is something that enables a great breadth of learning. It's not something where depth is done at the expense of making connections with other things. And I think that's great. And being a teacher in an Oxford college means that you get to touch base with a lot of areas of philosophy. And I think all of us as Oxford academics would feel that we keep connections with far more areas of both our own and neighbouring disciplines than we might do if we were relatively siloed in a department that was cut off from other kind of studies and subjects. And I think that's one of the excitements, not just about teaching and learning here, but also about being part of the community here. That's colleges encourage that kind of disciplinary interaction as well. So that's really, I suppose, the sorts of things that excite me about being here.
Thanks so much. I'm going to ask another question, which we get asked quite a lot in-person open days, but also I saw there was one of the questions on the Q&A about what is a tutorial like. So I'm going to ask the students, because there's a variety, and maybe they can talk a little bit about the variety they may have experienced. So Bethany, do you want to go first? What have your tutorials been like?
Yeah, I thought going into my first tutorials, they would be really scary and intimidating, and you'd have to know absolutely everything and done the entire reading list and just present yourself as really smart. But I found that they're a lot more laid back, a lot more relaxed, and they really give you a great opportunity to ask questions, even ones that aren't really related to what your essay or your work might have been, that you're just interested in, because the person that you will be giving you the tutorial is going to be very knowledgeable in that subject. And they're usually very, very friendly and very happy to have any kind of questions.
That's great. Paula, do you want to tell us a little bit about your tutorials? What's a tutorial like? And is it different, for example, for linguistics or for psychology?
Yeah, so I think the sort of content of the tutorials does vary a lot between the different courses. So for psychology, often it'll be based on either an essay that we've written or a presentation that we've done on some research we've been looking at, and we'll present those to each other and then have a discussion about the topic. And again, like Beth said, it's a good time to ask questions about stuff you didn't understand or stuff that you're more curious about. In linguistics, I think there's quite a variety of material in the tutorials, especially at prelims, when you take the 3 core courses, phonetics and phonology, grammatical analysis, and general linguistics. General linguistics for me was again always based around essays that we'd written in preparation for the tutorial, that we then kind of discussed in more detail. Grammatical analysis was a lot more looking at data sets of languages and spotting patterns and discussing the ways in which they're similar and they're different. And phonetics and phonology was again quite practical a lot of the time, some essays as well, but a lot of kind of working with like microphones and spectrograms and things. So I think it really does vary based on the specific course. But yeah, I think like my favorite part of studying.
That's great. So in terms of tutorials, what we've also explained to some people is that you tend to be in one specific group for the duration of that topic, but you do move around different colleges and also different tutorial partners. It's not like you start and you will always have tutorials in the same little group with the same tutor, but for one course, they do stay the same. So that's perhaps worth clarifying as well. We have a question, actually maybe one for Guy on the 4-year course, whether people can join within the 4th year. So, you know, I think we've made it clear that that's not the case. It's an integrated course, but maybe you can say something more about the 4-year option, just to summarize once more.
Yeah, thank you, Nelly. So we had to make a call on movement and transitions into this course, and it is a new course. So, which is why students who are on course now sadly cannot opt into staying for the 4th year, even though quite a few people asked if that was possible. It wasn't possible. But there are ways of continuing with your training in psychology that are equally valuable and just as interesting. And for example, and it's not infrequently, students who may or may not have studied psychology outside Oxford join us for the MSc. For an MSc course, it's a 1-year only final year master's, but it's separate from the new course we're proposing. That course, the new course, is a 4-year program. Students can opt to stay for the 4th year but change their mind, and equally students who apply to and would really like to, at the beginning, think they would like to stay only for 3 years, can also change their mind. And we've put a variety of checking points along the way so that the transition is possible in either direction. So it's really important, I think, to think that you're not committed to necessarily staying in one group if you discover along the way that it doesn't work. There are some milestones of which we will ask what your choices are. In particular, at the end of the 2nd year, we will ask, do you want to stay? and that will guide choices for the 3rd year. There are some final points at which changing won't be very helpful or good for students. So beyond those points, we will not allow for swapping unless it's absolutely necessary. So there are some key milestones, but we're not proposing. We're proposing relative flexibility between the two options. So for anybody who's thinking, I don't really know actually yet, the recommendation is, if you don't know, but you think the 4th year option is something you're thinking about, then maybe apply for that 4-year option with the knowledge that it is possible to transition to the 3-year option and leave. Did you want me to talk more about the structure? So rather than exactly what the interface between the two, the 3 and the 4-year option?
Yeah, well, definitely some people have asked also about how much philosophy can they do, how much linguistics can they do. So it might be worth explaining that it's not necessarily 50-50.
That's right. So, the new course builds very much on what already exists in terms of collaborations between psychology, philosophy, and linguistics. We're not changing that radically, which means that, I mean, as you've heard from Nele, if for combinations with psychology, with philosophy and linguistics, in fact, even if you are an EP student, you could take a final year paper in philosophy or linguistics. So provided you have taken the appropriate requirements that the philosophy faculty or the linguistics faculty asks students to take for that paper. So there is some element to which, some sense to which EP students could take either of those, or in fact, one paper in medicine or other disciplines. It normally requires quite a bit of extra work because the mindset or the preparation for tutorials may be different and so on, but it's absolutely possible. If you're enrolled as a PPL student, of course, there's the expectation that you will want to take a combination of subjects, and the most frequent is 2. So it could be philosophy and linguistics, or psychology and philosophy, and psychology and linguistics. And that remains for the 4-year program, something that maintains those roots. And in the introductory talk, Nella will have talked about relative components within psychology or within philosophy and linguistics. And if, as an applicant, you're wanting to then, after your degree, move on to a career within psychology, then we're bound by rules that are imposed by something called the British Psychological Society, which does tell us, for joint honours students, for students who want to take philosophy and another subject, how much psychology should you be taking? And that is the case both for the 3-year version of the course and the 4-year version of the course. It's not changing in that sense at all. What is somewhat still, certainly true of this first version of the 4-year course, is that final year at present, it's primarily cast as a psychology intensive 4th year. And that is not because we don't think that it could be of interest to linguists to take that 4th year, or philosophers to take that 4th year. It's simply that at present, the psychology faculty has agreed to commit their time to do that 4th year extended project. And that is something that is under discussion for the linguistics faculty and the philosophy faculty. So watch this space if you're thinking that final year extended project, could that be in a different discipline? At present, it's going to be primarily be in psychology. So going back to the question Nella was asking, the relative components in psychology that you can take. In the years 1 to 3, they remain similar across the 2 versions of the course. But in the 4th year at present, the extended project is primarily in psychological realm. Does that answer that question?
That's perfect, Gaia.
No big change, basically. And, you know, the more the merrier. We would love it if linguistics and philosophy also wanted to offer extended projects. No, I'm joking. But they're not at present. So correct, David and Emily. Good.
Thanks, Gaia. Okay, I've got another question here, which is more to the students, actually. So someone's asked, is the workload manageable? Do you know that people will be able to manage, and do people sometimes struggle with the pressures? So maybe if we go through all 3 of you, Paula, is the workload manageable?
I mean, people do manage it. People graduate with degrees every year. So it is a lot, and it definitely, I have definitely struggled at points, but I think this is something that Nelly mentioned as well in her answer on Slido, that a lot of the time, particularly for me, the struggle has been less about the workload itself and more about my own kind of perfectionism and attitude towards the work, which is definitely something that I have had to work on. And I think I've improved on that front. That workload has kind of forced me to improve and to be happy with submitting something that's fine, even if I don't think it's perfect, because at the end of the day, it'll never be what I think is perfect. And also at the points where I have struggled, the tutors have been very understanding. This term, for example, this term just gone, I just had exams in North Week and I was feeling quite tired, and I had 2 linguistics courses scheduled on top of my psychology course, and it got to halfway through the term and I realized I wasn't going to be able to do it, and my tutor for linguistics had noticed that the work I was handing in wasn't kind of quite finished, and he emailed me because he'd had that concern just of his own accord and said, is there anything we can do to make sure that you can engage with this course properly? And then we liaised with my organising tutor and postponed one of the linguistics courses until next term, so that I was able to engage more with the one I was doing this term. So tutors, in my experience, have been very understanding. And on top of that, you also have the fantastic college level welfare support, who will always be happy to support you in approaching your tutors or the department if you're too intimidated to do that yourself. and also offer you kind of additional support with the disability service if that's applicable, and kind of college level welfare. So it is definitely a tough workload. I think Oxford is known for that, but there is support in place, and at the end of the day it is manageable because people do manage it all the time.
Great. Beth, is there anything you want to add, maybe about welfare provisions or anything generally about workload and how you manage it?
Yeah, the workload can definitely be quite a lot, especially in the second year. I found the workload was quite intense. Third year is pretty good at the moment, so I might have jinxed it, but it's going so well so far. To manage the workload, personally, I like to schedule myself. And I think if you just be really strict with your time, then that usually works out pretty well. So if you say, I'm just going to work during the morning and early evening, and then the rest of the day you can have fun, go out, go to the pub, do whatever you want. That's a good way to get also a work-life balance. So you're not just stuck at your desk all the time. I think the trap is to not overread and to not overdo on the work. So you don't need to do like the most amazing, perfect essay or the amazing, perfect presentation. You just need to make it good and clear and like understand it to a good depth, but not go overboard. On welfare side, there's so much college support, so much support throughout the university. Like if you're struggling, even if you say to a tutor that I won't be able to hand in work on time, I've never had a tutor that's been nasty about it. They've always been lovely. They've always said, oh, and they've always checked up with me afterwards, like, are you okay? Do you need anything? So I think the workload is intense, but everyone understands that, and everyone understands that there's going to be some welfare issues or some other stressful events that might happen. And I also suspended for a year, so if it does like get onto you and it gets a bit too much, you can always take some time off. You don't even have to take a year off, maybe a term off, then come back and find your rhythm again and try and get into it. But yeah, there's so many options if you're having a tough workload or it's too much, that you don't really have to worry if it gets to that point, because there's going to be so much support for you.
Wonderful, thanks. I think from a tutor point of view, it's probably worth saying that for us, those tutorials are for us to teach you. You move on from the school stage where you have to hand work in on time or you'll be in trouble. This work that we set you is for you, right? It's not for us. It's for you to learn. It's for you to improve your learning and understanding of the material. So it's a different dynamic at university than it is at school. Can maybe I ask Jamie to come in briefly, because I know he's welfare rep, so maybe there's some more welfare stuff coming from Jamie.
Yeah. So in every college, we have kind of our common rooms, which are essentially bodies, the student body, the junior common room and the middle common room, JCR and MCR. And for each of those, there are welfare representatives who are student volunteers, essentially, who look after it. And I did that for a year at Jesus, and hopefully going to be doing that in the MCR next year. And so I'd say that there's a lot of student level provision as well as college level provision. I think that's one of the best things about the college system at Oxford, is that there's a very personable support system which acts as a kind of a net where if things go wrong, which they can do. And I think especially in COVID, it's been really useful to have quite a tight-knit small community, which has really allowed us to get through, or for me at least. I think it's a really wonderful thing about the college system. And each college has its own, not only student level, but also college level welfare support, which means that there's kind of an abundance of welfare support at Oxford, which I think is really, really good. So there's also the university counselling services, which offer free counselling support to students, although there is normally a small waiting list. And there's, for many colleges, have kind of their own dedicated counsellors or therapists. So there's a lot of support available, and in addition, there's a lot of funds which can go towards offering you counselling, but that often differs quite significantly from college to college. In addition, there are college nurses, for a load of them, and GPs that come into colleges to see students, as well as the chaplain, which is a non-faith specific welfare support in each college. And as I say, the roles of these tend to differ quite widely from college to college, but what can be guaranteed that there are welfare support systems at each college. And in addition, as I say, there's a JCR level, a student level welfare perspective. For example, a lot of us are trained in peer supporting, which is basically an active listening service. And every college, I think, has peer supporters that you can go and speak to non-judgmentally. In addition, we also have a dedicated Oxford Nightline service, which is kind of similar to Samaritans. It's a dedicated night listening service, which is completely confidential, and it runs at different times depending on if they can access the office during COVID and stuff, but normally it runs through the night. And obviously there's national services like the Samaritans in addition. So there's plenty of support at Oxford if you wish for it from the welfare perspective. And I think one of the best things about Oxford is because we have so many different institutions, there's very many different levels and approaches for that.
Anything any of the tutors want to add with respect to welfare and workload management? Maybe the thing to say on workload management is that is one of the big things that you learn in your university days, is to manage your workload and to timetable, and nobody's holding your hand in that respect as much as maybe in some cases, although definitely also not others. In secondary school you get told more specifically sometimes that this needs to be done then, and this needs to be done then.
It may be worth adding that Paula's experience of learning that not perfect may in some weeks have to be good enough is an experience you need to have at some point, because that's how work goes, basically. And maybe also saying, just as a footnote to Bethany's contribution, that the course is designed to be manageable. It absolutely is designed to be manageable. So taking years out is not something that is in any way a matter of course. It wreaks havoc with college accommodation and things like that. So it's really something that's got to be slightly exceptional. But if there are, for example, medical reasons for you need to take a year away, then there are medical reasons, and that will be worked with and worked through. Taking a term away is not straightforward, though, because we are designed as a residential university, and part of your contract, if you like, with the university and the college is to actually be here. Now, that's a slightly ironic thing to say at the end of a year when lots of people have not been here. Oxford has really struggled with what it means to do university remotely. Not that we've been bad at it, but it is such an unusual way to do university for a place where actual interactions, informal ones, probably more even than the formal tutorials, have been part of things. And you have to be here for, I think it's something like 42 nights a term in order for that term to count. And you have to do a certain number of terms in order to have kept residence for your degree. So it's absolutely true. It must be true that if there are problems, they need to be dealt with. And if those are best dealt with away from Oxford, then that's the way it has to be. But it's also important to say that those things can't be routine things, and you can't come expecting to be able to take a year away if you need to. That's something that would disrupt a lot of things, including your place in a friendship and a co-learning environment that would be disrupted by it. So just to raise a note of caution for anybody who hears this as a slightly laissez-faire thing, it's not a straightforward thing. It is hugely supportive, but the best thing for you is usually going to be to get through the degree in the time that's required with the group that you've joined with.
Can I jump in that as well? So as a tutor, so I mean, the workload is high, and yeah, year on year, it's actually quite common to hear the struggle, and in part of it, as Nella was saying, this is part of the learning experience is how to manage that challenge. We're also both as tutors and as lecturers and part of the departments really interested in hearing that it is difficult. So not just say, oh, it's difficult, that's part of the Oxford degree, but also that sometimes you don't get it perfectly correct. Like that maybe the planning and the workload could be made a little bit better or improved. And Bethany, you were referring to that second year, which is quite heavy in terms of workload for experimental psychology students. Absolutely, we agreed that that was true, and it's still heavy, but we've made changes because of the feedback that came from students, and so maybe those changes don't necessarily reap benefits immediately for the students who flag those problems, because it takes a long while to change things. That's just sad, but they change can happen. And so it's another thing that I think I really like about working with students more closely than I had experienced at other institutions, is that you can pick up on the level of stress and workload, maybe in a way that would be a bit harder if you only saw them once a term or at best, and so on and so forth. And therefore it's actually easier to see why sometimes things have to change. So yeah, so thank you for, thanks to all the students, in fact, for sometimes telling us, not just taking and being shy and hiding away in their rooms and going, I must cope, actually saying sometimes this is way beyond what should happen. And then some things we can change.
Yeah, definitely sometimes in the first year when people arrive, this kind of need to be perfect is a big thing, and is the biggest thing to adapt to, and especially the pace, right? So in year one, if you're doing EP, you're delivering a weekly essay for psychology, a weekly worksheet for stats, and a weekly essay for neurophysiology. So, I mean, that's a pace to turn around. And that's not what you're used to often, right? You might only do like one essay for a whole term back in school. So that kind of pace of delivering is something to get used to. And yeah, it won't be perfect. And that's okay. It's a learning thing. Jamie, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, I was just going to jump in and say, I would say that one thing, certainly about the Joint Honours PPL course, is that perhaps more than other degrees, I think there is a certain element of a sort of autonomous organisation from the part of the student, and that is completely fine. I've done it. It's quite manageable, but I was impressed to see from some modern languages students, even from some experimental psychology students, they sort of have these beautiful laid out plans from their tutors. And to be honest, that isn't something that one gets to study philosophy and linguistics. You do sort of have to be a little bit more on top of it, organising your course for you. So you do sort of have to ensure that you're choosing the modules at the right time, so you don't end up having to take 3 or 4 in the same term. But to be honest, that is highly manageable. And so long as you're sort of careful in advance, that's fine. I would sort of strongly suggest, though, something that students never do when they join is read the student handbook. I didn't fully read it the first time around. And what you will slowly learn is actually, there's a reason you have to read it. It's because it's really useful. And actually all the information that students tend to ask questions about happens to be in there, funnily enough. So if you do receive an offer, congratulations, do read that student handbook, because that will have a lot of your answers in terms of organization, especially for someone like us. For example, one of my tutors didn't realize I had to study statistics because I do philosophy and linguistics, but I do, and I had to kind of insist that I needed tutorials, and thankfully I did, because otherwise I would never have received preparation. So from that perspective, in terms of organization, you are going to gain a lot of organization skills, and it's a quick learning curve at Oxford. But that's just one thing to add, which is you can make your life so much easier by just being aware of certain pretty simple facts. And I would add to that, by reaching out for help. I think there are so many students who suffer in silence for so long, and that only makes things harder and often kind of leads you into a hole which is harder to dig yourself out of. It's a lot easier just to immediately tell your tutors or tell your support services at your college, the university central services, if you need help, and a lot of people are willing to help. That is something I've also learned, is that when I email my tutor at 3 a.m. saying I'm really struggling, they will more than happily move my tutorial or allow me to only submit a plan rather than an essay.
That's brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, I think following on from that, we want our students to do well. It's not that, we're holding up a high bar and like, haha, you can't reach it. We want you to do well. We want to help. If we don't know about a problem, we can't help you fix it. We can't, help find ways around things that we don't know about. But there is a lot of support available, as everyone said, both, university level, college level. There's a lot of student-based stuff, particularly a lot of disability stuff at all of these different levels. And the workload is high, but you learn a lot of skills in figuring out how to deal with it, which are sort of useful life skills, even if at the time it's a little bit stressful. But it's, we want you to do well. We want it to be a manageable course. we want all of these things for you. So we're not trying to set you up to fail, we're trying to set you up to succeed, but you need to sort of meet us in the middle with that. Yeah.
Thanks so much, Emily. I want to move on to admissions a little bit, because we haven't really spoken about admissions, and usually, definitely in the in-person versions, we get lots of questions about admissions. And especially having some students here, it might be worth hearing from them why they chose the college they chose. Did they choose a college? Did they end up in the college of their choice or somewhere else, and so forth? So Bethany, do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I chose the college. Well, I didn't choose the college. I chose University of Oxford as my college, University College, sorry. And yeah, I don't think they like me very much, but who knows? Who's to know? No, I'll never know. And I had my second interview at St. Anne's, and that went well since I'm here at the moment. And I think I kind of realised from not getting the college that I originally wanted to, that it doesn't really matter which college that you end up at, it's still the same Oxford experience. And I'm quite lucky that St. Anne's chose me, because it's a really lovely college and it's very down to earth. So I think it always works out in the end with college choices, always works out in the end.
Yeah, this is something we hear time and time again, and it's worth stressing for people. Everybody always loves wherever they ended up, first, second, or somewhere else. And this is social psychology at work, right? In-group bias is incredibly strong. So as soon as you're there, you feel like this is your tribe, this is your college. And almost everyone, I'm yet to hear from someone who said, oh, I still regret not getting into X or Y. It never happens. People just love wherever they end up. Can I hear from Paula? How did you choose? What made you decide, and where did you end up?
Yeah, so I applied to Worcester. I did end up at Worcester, and again, yeah, very glad I did. I think, and this is something that I know I spent a lot of time on. I know a lot of people tend to spend a lot of time on, is stressing over which college to choose. And it really isn't. I mean, there will be certain aspects that you might want to think about. If it's important to you that you're in a new college or an old college or a small one or a bigger one, it's worth having a think about that and thinking about maybe the facilities that you want. But if you do get in, you might not even end up at the college that you applied to. So it's not worth losing that much sleep over. But what I did before the open day, this is obviously when it was an in-person open day, was I figured out what was important to me. So for me, it was really important that I had a kitchen in my first year so that I could cook for myself. And you can find somewhere on the Oxford website like tables of which colleges offer which facilities. And I kind of narrowed down and used the Student Union's College Suggester. There's a tool where you can enter like the things that are important to you, the aspects of a college that are important, and it will crunch those numbers and throw back a couple of suggestions of colleges that might suit you. And so I had a look at those, and then I shortlisted, I think, like 4 or 5 to visit on the open day. I ended up only about visiting 3. And then I just walked into Worcester and I saw the quad and I was like, yeah, this is where I'm going. So yeah, I was very swayed by just what I saw on the open day. But I think even if I hadn't been on the open day, just looking at those facilities that were important to me, like having the kitchen and accommodation for all 3 years, I probably would have made the same decision anyway. But like we said, I don't think it's something to stress hugely about, because you might not even end up at the place that you applied to if you apply to a specific college, and wherever you end up, you'll probably end up loving it anyway.
Yeah, it's probably worth saying that what it really means is that you express a preference. If you want to express a preference, you can express a preference, but that's kind of the level that these college choices work at. Jamie, how did you pick, and What made you sway? Or did you do an open?
I did. I applied to Jesus. I was interviewed at Jesus and at Worcester, which I loved both of them. They were actually my top 2 choices, but I eventually made it to Jesus, which I'm very happy about. I was a little bit extra. I made it a massive spreadsheet and ranked it on various factors, which were given different weightings each. And I scrapped the entire thing because ultimately, when I went on the open day, I visited, I think, 9 colleges. And I didn't really like any of them sufficiently. And so I decided to pick Jesus because although I hadn't visited it, it did great across the board on my spreadsheet. And my mate was there and said it was really lovely and that was the friendliest college. And I think he's right. I think it's a really friendly college. I've really loved it. I think it was a great decision, which I'm very fortunate about to have made. But yeah, so I would strongly recommend visiting on the day. You do just get a sense for things. Obviously, I know that's more tricky during COVID times, but even the online virtual visits will probably really give you a feel for it. The colleges are very different. And I think another thing which is worth saying, which a lot of students perhaps don't realize until they come here, is that there are very different facilities and resources offered by colleges, and they will have different they will place emphasis on different things. So for example, if you're really into rowing, like Jesus is rubbish at rowing, we're really not great at it. You might be better off at a different college. So it's worth just kind of looking at that and seeing where they seem to place emphasis by, looking at their college website and what they're publishing about. If they're publishing about rowing success every 5th post, they're probably a big rowing college. So that kind of thing I think is really good. If you were wondering, Jesus is brilliant at football and cricket and many other sports, but not rowing.
I feel a bit bad for all the colleges not represented here because, clearly this massive in-group bias very much on display. Everybody loves their own college. Let's move on to interviews. This year they will be online again. It might be nice to hear from tutors what makes a good interview and perhaps what not to do in an interview to make it a bit more interesting and fun. Shall we start with Dave? What makes a good interview and what maybe to avoid?
Okay, so what makes a good interview is a combination of 2 things, speaking and listening. And if you don't get the second one of those, the listening one, right, then the interview will probably not go as well as it otherwise might. We're going to ask you stuff. When we ask you stuff, that's what we want to talk about, not something else. If you prepare a monologue to deliver that's going to last roughly 22.5 minutes of the 25 or so that we've got, and then you deliver your monologue, the interview will go well in one sense because it will be a very smooth experience for everybody, but it will not go well in another sense because it will be telling us basically nothing. So what are we looking for? What are we wanting to find out? We're wanting to find out how you think. We're wanting to find out whether you can think live and out loud with us in person, whether you can take on board what you're being told, take on board what you're being asked, whether you can revise your views, whether you can settle on a view and then defend it. And it means that an interview can be quite a staccato, quite a jumpy affair as we intervene to maybe we are confident now, we know where you're going with an idea, and so that's fine, and now we want to try something else, or we want to challenge you with something. That's actually more difficult in one of these kind of environments where it's intervening, just jumping in and saying now stop, is going to involve microphones jerking and speakers blaring and stuff. So it's more difficult to do it online. But certainly a good interview will be a conversation, and quite an engaged conversation, the kind of conversation that does sometimes involve interrupting for you to be asked what you mean by something, maybe suggesting a particular direction you might go in with things that you've started to say. So we get interested in that and say, well, of the 2 things you've just said, the one we'd like you to concentrate on is this rather than that. And so it's very interactive. It'll go very quickly if you are fully engaged with it. It will be over in a flash. Lots of people who have interviews that have gone really well first of all, don't necessarily feel that they've gone really well, but secondly, wonder where the time went, because they were so zoned into what we were doing. We'll probably now hear from the students that it just went on forever and it was interminable and all that sort of stuff. But certainly things that people often perhaps politely say afterwards is that. So what's a really bad interview? A really bad interview could be just silence, saying nothing, not because you're not thinking, but because you're not able to think out loud. We need to see and hear the gears kind of whirring in order for us to be able to help you think and for us to find out how you think. So silence is bad, but monologues, delivering speeches at us, that's really bad as well. So it's somewhere in the middle that we want to be. We are not interested in the answers to the questions we are asking you. We are interested in the process of reasoning that gets us towards an answer to the question that we've asked you. The question we've asked you, we may well not know the answer to. Otherwise, why would we bother asking it? Well, sometimes we will have a feeling about what the answer is. But we will ask you questions that require you to think, and it's the thinking that we are testing, not how far we get. It could be that we get almost, fraction of the way along, but we've been thinking deeply and keenly about it, and we've learned a huge amount about your capacity to thrive on our degrees and in the way that we teach. And if we've learned that, we've learned everything we can learn from an interview. We know loads of other stuff. We know about A-levels, we know about your results at GCSE, lots of other information that tells us you can work in a sustained way over a period of years. What we can't tell from any of that is how you will work in our context. So if we can find that out, you will have done well by us, and we will hopefully have done well by you as well.
Thanks, Dave. From a linguistics perspective, Emily, is there something you want to add that you're looking for in an interview, or that makes a no-go area? Please don't do this in an interview.
The interview will probably be a mix of more general questions, perhaps drawing on things you've mentioned in your personal statement, and then responding to some data. So with the more personal statement, perhaps a bit focused of it, we want to see you've actually read things you've mentioned in your personal statement. So don't, mention wonderful things that you then can't say anything about in interview. But with what we care about is that you've thought something. So we don't care if you actually think it's a very dodgy book for these reasons. What we care about is the reasons why you like or don't like something. And we want to see your thought processes with the data. I don't mind if the answer's wrong. Like a correct answer with no rationale isn't very useful for us. I'd far prefer a wrong answer that you very clearly told me how you got there. So it's that, showing us your thought process is key. And, seeing how you can pick out patterns in data and how you can respond when we give you a new bit of information. Can you then, use that in light of the data we're giving you to think through a bit more? We want you to be able to thrive on our courses. And a large part of our teaching is tutorial style. But of course, what I would reassure you is you'll all have more than one interview. Your perception of how well the interview has gone is probably different to our perception of how the interview has gone, because we may be looking for different things to what you think we're looking for. And however you do in the interview, it's part of the whole holistic package of your application. So, if you think one interview has gone badly, that's not necessarily the death knell for your application as a whole. We take in the entirety of the information that we have. So do try, if one interview's not gone well, to not psych yourself out for the next one. And just try and enjoy the process. From my Oxford interviews eons ago, I really enjoyed it and I learned things, and I still look back on it going, oh, actually that was really fun, I learned about this and that. So just try and enjoy yourself.
Excellent. And then maybe from psychology, Gaia, do you want to say what not to do? Let's go on that.
Okay, what not to do. Do not think that we're out to trip you up in any way. I think sometimes, I, for example, never applied to Oxford, not because I was scared of the interviews, but because I thought I wouldn't fit in and maybe people would behave in a certain way. Well, tutors at interviews certainly are not up to in any way trip anyone up with tricky questions or questions that require a particular type of background or prior knowledge to answer them. We're not testing what you've learned before you come to the interview, but we really are trying to see what you think. And so this is very much where philosophy, psychology, and linguistics align. We just want to hear you think. So we want to hear you think in the interview. And that's done in different ways, I hear, from interviewees across colleges, but we have that common goal. So don't think that we're trying to trip you up in any way. In fact, I mean, maybe that's not how all interviewers think, but I think of interviews as like a mini tutorial. It's my chance to get a sense of how, when challenged, but not particularly challenged because a challenge is a great thing to use, but when presented with data, as Emily was saying, the person you have in front of you, will there be a spark? Will there be something really interesting that comes up? An idea that's maybe different, completely off the wall, maybe, but that can go really in interesting directions in terms of hypothesis or reasons or why it's an interesting direction. So maybe one way of one thing not to do is to think that the interview is there to trip you up. And one thing to do is that it's your chance to find out a little bit what a tutorial is like. So maybe that's a more positive view of an interview. Yeah. I know it's difficult to think of it that way.
Anything the students want to add from their experience, having gone through interviews? You know, what do you think went well for you, or how do you prepare? We always get asked, how do you prepare for interviews? Shall we hear from Paula?
I mean, I think, like has been said, like you can't prepare for an interview in the sense of learning content because they're not assessing what you already know. So I think that if you do want to do some preparation, the best way is to practice having discussions about your subject with people, with friends, with family, with teachers, or even just like with yourself. Practice thinking about like a big question in the subject, and yeah, practice that thinking out loud. I personally I had like one mock interview at my school, and that was it, but I would like talk my mum's ear off at dinner about like what we'd learned in psychology A-level that day, and I'm lucky in the sense that my mum was quite engaged and like asked me questions, and we had more of a discussion about things, and I think that was really, really useful. But I wouldn't panic if you can't get that kind of help, because the interview is designed to be something that you can't be coached on. I mean, I had no like completely not an accurate perception of how my interviews had gone at all. I didn't think for a moment that I was going to get into Worcester. I think what Nelly said about not letting one interview kind of psych you out for your later interviews is quite important. I had my first interview at Worcester in psychology, and it was very late in the day, and I was really worried I was going to miss dinner. And I think I was quite upset because it was going to be lasagna for dinner, and I really love lasagna, so I was like really stressed. And so I kind of came out of the interview and I was quite teary, and I got to my room and I thought, you know, I could try and bottle this up and risk it bubbling up again in my interviews tomorrow, or I could just cry now and let it out and then kind of have a blank slate tomorrow. And those kind of the interviews the next day, I guess they didn't really matter because I did end up getting into Worcester anyway. But yeah, you have no idea how the interviews have gone, because if you've been challenged, like I felt like a complete idiot in my interviews because I wasn't getting the answers. But yeah, like has already been said, they're not looking for you to get the answers, they're looking for how you try and get to them.
We dare ask Jamie in his extra over-preparedness how he prepared for interviews.
I actually didn't do too much prep for interviews because, as I said, interviews aren't meant to be prepped for. And actually, I think if you're prepping specifically for interviews, you probably haven't been prepping through your life the right way. It's kind of something you just should have already been done, which is like thinking a bit beyond the course because you really genuinely are interested in it. from a specifically philosophy perspective, I'd give 2 specific tips. The first one is when you're reading, don't just try and read as much as you can. Read really in depth, by which I mean think about what you're presented with and whether you agree. And firstly, how you would respond. And then how you would reply on behalf of the writer to your own objection, and so forth. Just keep trying to go through responses and responses and responses. And the second one is, don't be too stubborn in your position. My favorite part of the interview was the bit where they said, okay, so what do you think about this problem? And I said, I think X position rather than Y position. They said, right, argue for Y position now, right? They purposely make you think about what you don't necessarily believe, because philosophy isn't about what side do you take, because there's no correct side. It's about your ability to argue for a side. And so they're going to really want that kind of intellectual agility or flexibility. And so that is something I struggled with in my first mock interview, and I practiced really hard. I'm really glad I did, because as I say, I got asked to switch sides a lot during my my interview.
Maybe last one, Bethany, did you do anything specific to prep? And then we should call it the end, actually.
Yeah, I didn't do too much preparation for my interviews because, like what Jamie said, I think it's mainly you can't really prepare because you don't know what's going to be thrown at you, and it's more about how you think anyway. But Paula's advice on trying to become more fluent in how you communicate your ideas is a great idea, so that you're better able to show how you think to your tutors when you're in that interview. I think my main tip would be not to panic and not to get too flustered, because that can really make you stop thinking, so you don't come off as fluid, or you don't have as much ability as what you can show them. You want to perform well and show them everything. You've got this opportunity to present yourself as this potential Oxford undergraduate. So try not to panic, maybe do whatever you need to do to relax beforehand, so your brain's switched on and is in the best condition for when you go into that interview.
Yeah, try and get some sleep beforehand, always good. Let's call it at that, and thank everyone again to come on and share your thoughts with us, tutors and students. It's really much appreciated. I hope whoever's watching found it interesting as well. We'll keep the live stream up so you can always watch it back later. All right, thank you.